Hello, my name is Donn Weaver. I'm a former Army officer. I'm currently the chairman of the Brevard Veterans Council, vice president of the Veterans Center, including the Memorial Museum, which you're going to see in a little while. It's a delight for me to be able to talk to you this week, the anniversary of 9/11. None of you were born before 9/11, so let me tell you, I want a favor. Go home tonight, talk to your parents, and ask them what were they doing on 9/11? How did it impact them? What I'm going to try to tell you today is a little bit about how it impacted our country and our military and a lot of things that I hope you'll find interesting. When we see 9/11 and talk about it, we've got to remember it's the 11th day of September 2001. On that day, it was a culmination of four major attacks on our country. We'll go through those one by one so you'll be able to focus on that. But to understand anything about current military matters, we have to talk about history. In your studies that you'll have this year and perhaps already have had in previous years, you'll learn about how important World War II was for the American nation and for our country. You'll learn about Vietnam and Korea and other major conflicts. But in the 1980s and the 1990s, there began to be a series of attacks that, quite frankly, the Americans didn't realize were going to culminate in what happened on 9/11. There were attacks all over the world against American citizens. There were attacks in New York City in 1992 against the World Trade Center by planting explosives underneath the World Trade Center. And there were attacks that killed more than 3,000 people by terrorism from 1990 until 2001. 3,000 people all over the world. If you think about it, why would people use terror against innocent civilians to accomplish their political goals? And the answer is found throughout history. Terror has been something that people have employed. The fact that the 9/11 terrorist attacks all came from radical elements of the Saudi Arabian and Yemeni population. They were all Muslims, but you have to remember that being a Muslim, Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world. There are over 1.4 billion people who are Muslim, and only a very tiny percentage who can be classified as terrorists, radical Islamic terrorists. So the point is that as 9/11 approached, America was complacent. I remember flying on a plane not too far before 9/11 and noticing as we took off, the front door of the cockpit flung open. The pilot, I could see the pilot at the controls and everything. The 200 passengers on the plane could see him and could have gone up and done something then. So we were complacent. We didn't stop to think that terrorism could really happen in the United States. Most terrorist attacks had happened overseas. So 9/11 then was a morning that those of us who are alive will never forget. If you have grandparents, I want you to go and ask them, where were they when World War II ended, if they were alive then, or great-grandparents if they're still with you. Or go ask a grandparent, where were they in 1962 in October during the Cuban Missile Crisis, or the 22nd of October 1963 when John Kennedy was killed. So for your parents, 9/11 may have been the first day as an American that they were really impacted by a single event that brought the entire country to a standstill and brought our entire thinking about what that day meant to a whole new direction. Let's talk about 9/11 before we go to the museum and see some of the actually artifacts. I've got a piece of the Pentagon that I want to show you when we get to the museum that was just damaged severely that day. So what had happened about 8 months before 9/11, the Saudi nationals who would lead 19 members of the hijack teams, 4 different teams, came to the United States pretending to be normal visitors. A number of them enrolled in aircraft training courses to learn how to fly big aircraft. Several of them were in Florida, less than 100 miles from here. They learn how to fly, and unfortunately, in after-action studies, the instructors never reported that a number of them didn't ask how to learn how to land. If you think about that, if you're learning how to fly a jet aircraft and you're not interested in landing it, what's your motive? So that was kind of a foolish thing that they told the instructors, but it never made its way back to the police or the FBI or the American intelligence community. So they trained in the United States. They paid for the schooling by Osama bin Laden, who was later killed in 2011, but who was the mastermind of Al-Qaeda. When you translate Al-Qaeda, it means the base. It was the base of the radical Islamic terrorism that was fomented, and they found a safe haven for many years in Afghanistan. They worked in Afghanistan, and they trained, and they kept the secrets hidden as they trained and prepared for 9/11, 2001. I should say, as I mentioned, I have my career was in the Foreign Service, so I know many Afghans, and they all remind me, and they reminded me once when I did a tour with them up in New York, which we'll talk about later, in the new museum that honors 9/11, that not one Afghan was in that group. It was not Afghanistan or one country that drove it. It was the nature of being radical and Islamic terrorists. When they started their plan, they began to board aircraft from Boston, from New York, ironically, and from Washington, D.C., and they had 4 different teams. The aircraft were all destined to go to long-distance destinations, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago. So they had completely full aircraft with jet fuel, totally full, even though the terrorists, the hijackers, would have it different. The first aircraft that was hijacked, there wasn't much learned. A couple of passengers got through and saw what was happening. They saw that easily they breached and took over flying the aircraft. They killed the pilots and the co-pilots. They overtook the plane. They told everybody to be quiet, and they pretended that this was a hijacking that had happened in the 70s, in the 80s, even in the 60s, where aircraft were hijacked and taken to other airports and ransom demanded, or political goals demanded. So everybody assumed they would fly and they would land somewhere and they would be safe. It was the wrong assumption that day. So the first aircraft struck the tower, the first World Trade Center tower. All of you have seen pictures of these towers. I hope you've seen pictures of the now 110-story high single tower that was built to replace those towers in New York. Why did they attack New York? They had tried it in 1992. Osama bin Laden had been involved in that and failed. Although some Americans were killed, they drove a big truck bomb into the garage of one of the World Trade Centers, blew it up, but it didn't cause massive structural damage. So I think the total was about 6 or 8 Americans that were killed that day. But they had that as a target because New York is the economic center, a cultural center, a melting pot of all Americans. Remember, America is a great country because we are occupied by people who were born in other countries as well as here. And New York was the epitome of that. But American financial power was symbolized by Wall Street and those 2 World Trade Center buildings, 102 stories high, that had been built in the early 1970s and were a symbol of American economic power and, of course, of New York City. So the first aircraft hit there, hit about 3/4 of the way up when you see the filming of it. Please, by the way, today, 9/11, when I hope you're watching this, you'll see things on TV. Get the information, get the details from the TV. But I wanted to be here first to really talk to you about this as the impact it was. The second aircraft hit the next tower. As you can imagine, when the first aircraft hit, the initial news report said, oh my gosh, a private plane somehow crashed into the World Trade Center. No, it was an airplane full of passengers from many different countries, including, by the way, many Muslims, who died instantly when that plane crashed into the World Trade Center at the 60th floor, the other one at the 70-something floor. When the second plane hit, everybody knew there was a terrorist attack. At that point, the two other planes, efforts were being made on the two other planes to impact it because the passengers were beginning to hear, after they thought their planes had been hijacked and would go to a different airport and land safely, they realized that they were also caught up. The next airplane hit the Pentagon, the symbol of American military might in Virginia, Northern Virginia, just south of Washington, D.C. 169 people in the Pentagon, military and civilians, were killed, as well as all the passengers and all the crew of that aircraft. Finally, in the one that people forget about, and a monument was just completed last year, another aircraft, the people rebelled. They got together. They fought the crew. They broke into the cockpit. They killed the Arabs that were there, the radical Islamic terrorists that were flying the plane. But it was too late to change the trajectory of the plane. They sacrificed their lives to save what most believe would have been the Capitol building of the United States, which was the target, it was believed, of that aircraft. So in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the final of the four planes goes down. So 9/11 then is etched in an hour and a half of terrible experience as a nation. We have a gentleman here that works at the Veterans Memorial Center, where I'm talking to you from, right behind the Merritt Square Mall, who actually was with the Federal Aviation Administration that day and was working in Washington. Bill Wilkenine is on our library staff. He tells a fantastic story about ordering all the planes to land all over the country, redirecting international flights. For 4 days, the only planes that flew were military aircraft. By the way, military aircraft scrambled and were ready to shoot down the last two planes, but they couldn't get there in time, and they didn't need to, because one plane was rescued by the Americans I told you about, and the other plane, too late, had already struck the Pentagon. But by then, the aircraft were there and had been scrambled. The United States is a great country, you know that. You're back to school now, and I'm glad you're in the classroom or learning on virtual training, that we can't forget big holidays. At the Veterans Memorial Center at 5:30 on this Friday, 9/11, we'll have the anniversary, the 19th anniversary of 9/11. We'll try to help other Americans and recall not just what happened that day, but what happened to the many thousands of people who spent years cleaning up New York, and many of whom developed cancer and have died because of the carcinogens in the rubble of 9/11. 33,000 people were sick. On 9/11 day, 2,928 Americans died. That's more than died at Pearl Harbor, so when World War II started. So it was a tremendous blow to the United States. It shook our confidence for a while, but it created a resolve. We created you'll see on TV, if you watch the news, the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, the National Intelligence Director, all kinds of new positions in an effort to better coordinate between law enforcement and the military, why we didn't detect this before it happened, why we didn't prevent it. So 9/11 then was the beginning of a series of events that still goes on. In addition to those 33,000 people that are suffered, many Americans were in high school at 9/11, or they were in grade school at 9/11, and more than 5 million of them during those years since 9/11 have joined the United States military. Since 1983, everybody who joins the military raises their hand and volunteers. Nobody was drafted. But maybe your uncles or even your parents in some cases joined the military to go to the fight afterwards. Within 6 weeks, we had taken out the major element leads in Afghanistan on a dramatic war against these Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden. He escaped and was later killed hiding in Pakistan. But he was later killed in 2011. But Al-Qaeda was effectively destroyed over those few years, and we're looking at a situation that indicates that other terrorist groups have sprung up. Some of you may have heard about ISIS, the Islamic State. They have been recently defeated, and we will not allow terrorism to culminate like it did in those years leading up to 9/11, I hope ever again. So the American military has come to the fight. Let me tell you that so far, in combat alone, 6,276 American men and women have died fighting the radical terrorists that we've talked about in more than 70 countries around the world. Terrorism is not like a nation state. It's one thing to defeat Japan or Germany in World War II. It's another thing to defeat radical terrorist groups, no matter what their ideology, no matter what their religion, or in my case, I call it lack of religion. Islam does not call on murdering everybody who doesn't agree with you. But Islam, like any religion, can be misinterpreted. And that's what these people did and still do. There was an American soldier gravely wounded by Al-Shabaab, a group in Somalia, just yesterday. So the fight goes on. Our brave American men and women are out there doing the fight there. After 9/11, there were a number of terrorist attacks here, but they were all relatively minor. With the changes of aircraft and how you board aircraft and security, going through TSA, for those of you who've flown, you know that long security line. That's why. Before 9/11, they didn't exist, or at least not nearly in that scrupulous a way. Before 9/11, we didn't think about the dangers that were out there as we perhaps should have. But 9/11 changed all that. But 9/11 also brought a spirit in this country that I'm very proud of. Not only did we get many people to join our military and go forward, but we also got a country that was coordinated in doing new military spending to make better military equipment for use in this new fight. We created a very strong special operations capability. If you look at many TV programs, you'll see special operations there now, whether they be SEAL teams or Green Berets, Special Forces, Air Force Rescue, all these special units now, they're the ones that now are carrying on the majority of the fight against this very shadowy, very challenging enemy. Before we go to the museum, I just want to say a couple of words. This program is being brought to you in cooperation with your teachers, with Brevard County Public Schools, and hopefully later other schools that will see it, by an organization we started 5 years ago in Brevard called Brevard Veterans Back to Class. We are veterans. You know my name, Donn Weaver. Paul Julian is our cameraman. Joe Davey is supporting him with the technology. We're all veterans. We all care about the youth of our country. So with the Brevard Veterans Back to Class, we had a program in the last 4 years. We've talked to over 12,000 of you in classrooms since in those 4 years. We can't do it this year, at least not this part of 2020. We hope in 2021 be able to come back, because for us it's important to come back and tell our story, tell what veterans have done, and help you remember how important it is to support veterans and how important it is to consider yourselves the fact of service in after you finish high school, whether it be joining the military, becoming a doctor, working as a teacher. All these people put service first, and that's what we veterans do. Never stop serving is our motto, and we are very, very glad to be with you here today. I would say it's very sad that we can't ask for questions after this, but I hope you've enjoyed this tape. We'll wrap it up in the museum, and we want to thank your teacher personally, whoever they are, for showing this tape during this module, hopefully on 9/11 or shortly thereafter if they don't get it in time. And again, thank you for attending school, working hard in school, because America stays a good country, a special country, only if the next generation takes the challenges and goes forward. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
I'm done.
We're in the museum now at the Veterans Memorial Center. This is a 6,000 square foot museum, and right now we're in the 9/11 Remembrance section. If you'll pan with me and see, we have here the flags of New York City, Fire Department, Police Department, and the Special Commemoration flag against the backdrop of the pictures from that day. And if you look down lower, after you pan down the World Trade Center, the two strikes against the World Trade Center, you'll see the hallowed ground where the airplane hit in Pennsylvania, and also to the left, you'll see the Pentagon, where the Pentagon was attacked that day, the west side of the Pentagon, and killed 169 people in the Pentagon, plus the entire passengers and flight crew members. Also here, if you come over this way, you'll see a symbolism of never forgetting that will be used in our performance that I told you about, our commemoration of 9/11 this Friday at 5:30 at the Veterans Memorial Center. And they honor the units that suffered the most casualties in 9/11 and the different organizations that came to 9/11. And as I remind you, still today, a lot of people are suffering because of the cleanup and the impact of the carcinogens and whatever because of the tragic problems of 9/11. What I want to do now, I'll ask Paul to go over toward the flag over there and look backward toward me. What we've done, and I mentioned this earlier, what we've done is try to remember that because of 9/11, Americans have really gone to the fight. All our armed forces have had multiple tours in many cases in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, all kinds of places, Syria most recently, as they fought various forms of radical terrorism and continue that fight today. So if you come to the museum, you'll be able to see some of the modern era weapons and other things that are available, and some from the Iraqis, some from Afghanistan. And we're going to walk around in a minute and show you some other things. But first, we have a real prized piece I want to share with you. It's a solemn piece. This is a piece of the Pentagon that we were given to honor our effort to remember 9/11. So the Pentagon piece that was after the attack is now permanent part of our museum. In our plaza, which is outdoors, you'll see actual iron beams from the World Trade Center in our memorial to the people that lost their lives that day. Let's go around this way. We'll start on this side. If you look here, here is a flag that honors the names of every of these. You won't be able to see it on the camera, but the flag of honor created for those who perished during the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001. So the blue and the red stripes has name after name after name of those who perished in that attack. Okay, if we'll walk back this way, if we can get a look into the cabinets, you'll see some of the military equipment that is now used in the war on terror. We don't forget that we also have to keep our soldiers happy. There's some M&Ms that get in their meals ready to eat packets, and some of the memorabilia that they gave us after they came back from overseas. If you'll pan over here, this is a typical U.S. Army soldier ready for combat in today's war against radical terrorism, equipped with multiple weapons and all kinds of technical equipment, night vision scopes, night vision equipment, which give us tremendous ability against the enemy to operate during evening hours. I want to end this by simply saying, please come and visit our Veterans Memorial Center Museum. I promise you it's the best in the state of Florida, not located in a federal government property. It is 6,000 square feet, 2 stories high. We have a tower where you can look over our 82-acre Veterans Memorial Park. We host Raider Challenge meets for those in JROTC. We've hosted a couple of cross-country teams to run in our park. So we really are a place where we hope Americans will understand what veterans have done and learn more about what veterans have done. Good luck in school this year. Stay strong. We will get through this coronavirus. Focus on doing what your parents tell you, what your teachers tell you, and remember that as you go through life, what you learn in school, what you learn because of school, and what you keep learning throughout your whole life, as I promise you I've done, and I'm a little bit older than any of your parents or grandparents probably, so let me just tell you, keep learning and keep looking for ways to serve. Thank you, and God bless America.